On today's Story Beat.
If the dream and the desire is in you, it's in there for a reason. Don't let that die. Don't say, well, my so-and-so, my friends, my family, they don't like me to do that. Do it. I'd rather be miserable chasing the dream that I did. I chased my dream, failed at pretty much everything. Got a lot of great stories out of it, but I'm so happy now that I didn't just give up. And a lot of times you look at the people, the Foxworthys of the world that had a vision. Follow your vision, follow your dream, and surround yourself with positive people that will encourage you.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Dobie Maxwell, has made a successful living in stand-up comedy since 1985. Starting in 1990, he's had several stints in morning radio. Dobie has appeared numerous times on national and regional television. And from 1995 to 2020, Dobie taught his Maxwell Method of stand-up comedy at Zanies Comedy Clubs in Chicago to more than 3,000 students. Dobie's a published author of a true crime story about his life called Monkey in the Middle, and he currently co-hosts a critically acclaimed podcast about all things diabetes called Just My Type. Originally from Milwaukee, Dobie currently makes his home in Bristol, Wisconsin, where he continues to tweak and improve his craft for a post-pandemic new normal. For those reasons and so many more, it's my great pleasure to welcome the very funny Dobie Maxwell to StoryBeat today. Dobie, thanks for joining me on the show.
Steve, the pleasure is mine. I have never been with a host who has been so thorough, so friendly, so upright. I am nervous that I'm going to live up to the billing, but I'm going to try my best.
I'm going to disabuse you of that right away.
Let it rip, buddy. Let's go. The gloves are
right,
off.
Let's go back in time then, Dobie. Let's talk about your earliest influences. When did you think to yourself, at what point in your life, I like these guys are doing comedy and I would like to do that myself? When did that first happen for you?
Very unusual influence, the Hollywood Squares television show back in the 70s when I grew up, and I watched that show and I'd see the people like Paul Lynde and Charlie Weaver make the funny answer. Peter Marshall, the host, would ask the straight question, they'd come back with a smart answer. And I'd see that. And in my third grade class in Milwaukee, there's a lot of German people. I don't know how it is in Pittsburgh. I love Pittsburgh. I've been there.
Lots of Germans here.
Well, the Germans, they can fix your engines. They can cook a good Stullen. Germans aren't funny. I'm sorry. You're not going to see Klaus's Comedy Bunker in Stuttgart. You're never going to see that. And I have German blood going through my veins. And my third grade teacher, Mrs. Muckerhide, that was her real name, Agnes Muckerhide. And your face kind of scrunches when you say that name. It's like you ate about a pound of bad sauerkraut. And I would do the thing. She'd ask a question, and I would do the Hollywood Squares funny answer. And the class would laugh. And buddy, that's just like heroin going through your veins. It's such a wonderful feeling. Mm-hmm. And she said, all you do is joke in my class. You think you're going to grow up and find a job where you get paid to tell jokes? So thanks to Mrs. Muckerhide in Milwaukee, I had a 35-year run telling jokes, and it was a blast.
So you got your first taste of it as being basically a class clown.
Class clown, yeah. And what I found out later when I was very disappointed was that those questions were written for those celebrities. I was doing it off the top of my head. I was putting jokes together on my own at age 9. So I'm a natural, and I don't mean that to say bragging. I'm sure in any creative craft, there are people that are natural and there are people that have to work extra hard at it. And I think it's a good thing to be in the middle of that, because to me, what I've seen in the creative process, the naturals are the one that don't work the hardest. Well, I can just get this. I can just do this. I'm good at it. Athletes the same way. And I think you have to have a mix that makes you have enough talent to be able to do it, but enough drive to want to be the best.
Well, I can't picture for a moment that it didn't take a lot of work to do what you do.
Oh my gosh, it is unbelievable. I tell people now, you want less work, manage a Taco Bell. There's less work in that, and that's working 60 to 70 hours a week, because you have to wear so many hats in entertainment. You know that. You're the writer, the producer, the star, the marketing person, the tax accountant, and everything comes around you. And I think most people can't pull it off. I'm great at the show, bad at the business.
So, well, that's pretty common in the arts world in
Yes, it
general,
is.
that artists are frequently very good at their art and not so good at the business of the art. But
Yep.
it is after all called show business. It's not called show art.
But it should be business show because the business is much more important in the long run. I think even somebody that has a mediocre quote unquote career grasps the business at an early age. I think we all have this picture of a mythical limousine pulling up with a guy with a huge cigar case. Hey, Steve, come on in. We're going to the top, and I'm not going to take any money from you. And I'm not going to ever have tax problems, and you're going to be at the top forever. And we have people laugh when I say to that. I'm only exaggerating a little bit because we assume it's going to be that way. And when you get actually in there and you find out, well, there's other people that have talent, maybe more than I do. We don't want to admit that. But it's a waking up process, and the longer it gets, a marathon, not a sprint. The longer you stay in it, the better chance you have to succeed, even a little bit.
Well, I think that's true for a lot of industries, where the more that you do it, the better you get at it. But it's particularly true in show business. The more you do it, the better you get.
I think you have to do it. That's one thing it's not a theory. In reality, you got to get out there and honky tonks and gin joints. And again, writing is a little different thing. But acting, you have to do the summer stock or whatever it is. In comedy, I've got more miles than Rand McNally, and nobody knows who that is anymore. But,
well, we're going to get into the process of that shortly. But okay, so were you figuring out how to write jokes, not just off the cuff, say them in class, but were you figuring out how to write comedy early on as well? Or did that take a while to develop?
It did take a while to develop, because I think the mistake, I mean, it's not a mistake, it's a natural thing. You go on stage with what you think is funny, and the audience will either confirm or deny that on a nightly basis. And I think there's a process of trial and error, mostly error, to find out who you are. I started when I was 20 years old. And back in the 80s, I was lucky enough to be in the boom years. So it's a lot of people that had no business near sound amplification equipment, which was me. And another one of your guys, Ed Driscoll, when I first heard about your show, Ed and I, he started in Pittsburgh, I started in Milwaukee, and we were terrible. And you admit that, but we got work because it was a demand then. Now there's 10 times the wannabe comedians and a 10th of the paid work. So that era is gone forever.
Well, there's no question that there's no place you can go to learn to be a stand-up comedian, like a college or a university. You have to just go do it, correct?
You have to go do it. And I've been teaching classes for 25 years. And the first thing I've taught every class I've ever seen, first thing in the first 2 minutes, I cannot make you funny. Anyone that says that they can is lying to you and stealing your money. I can show you what to do. I can tell you how to do it, but you have to go out and do the actual work. And it's one set 10,000 times, over and over and over again, and tweaking. And it's not easy. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. You got to have an obsession. And I call it, we're dented cans. We didn't get enough love at home, so we have to go out in front of strangers in some honky-tonk gin joint, smoke-filled fornicatorium in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. I'll use a local reference for you.
Did you just say fornicatorium?
Yes, I did. That's a word I came up with years ago that just kind of stuck.
That is a great word. I may steal that word from you.
You can borrow it with my blessing, Steve. I'd be honored if you'd use that word. Absolutely.
Fornicatorium. That is a great word.
We were coming back with because back in the 80s, they would put, when the discos went out of business, they would take the disco ball down and put a brick wall up and have comedy shows. And a lot of the same people, and you work all these places at a honky tonk, some bar somewhere, and just I don't know, the word fornicatorium came up with, and it just stuck. And it's like, well, that's a Dobie word. Well, you want that?
I like it a lot. So, do you think of yourself primarily now as a stand-up comic, or do you think of yourself as a writer, or is it a combination of all of the above? How do you think of yourself?
I really think that once comedy is in your blood, you become a lifer at some point. I don't know how many times on stage, maybe it's 1,000. I can't compare it to acting, but it's one of those things where the pandemic put us all, set us down, and I got back up on stage again. I was a little rusty, but it all came back. You know what I'm saying? I am a comic, a stand-up comic. That's what I've done for all of my adult life. And I love the process. I don't like, Eric Clapton said about it. He said, I like the gigs. I don't like getting there. Same thing. Most normal people, whatever normal is, drive 30 to 45 minutes to work an 8 to 10 hour shift. Comedians drive 8 to 10 hours to work a 30 to 45 minute shift. It's the same amount of time. You're in a car. It's horrible. It's not a good lifestyle, not conducive to anything normal, but it's that laughter, man. It's an addiction. It's a drug. And I admit it, I am so hooked.
And how do you then, while you're on the road, are you developing at the same time? Are you always thinking up jokes? Is it constant, steady thing for you? Or do you have to sit down and concentrate?
I got into radio because I thought radio would be stable. Now, this has a point. Now, when stand-up comedy looks quote unquote stable, radio is completely outlandish. So, and someone told me in radio, you'd say the different things to the same audience every day. In comedy, you say the same things to a different audience every day. So you're basically tweaking the act that you have every single night. That's why you have to travel so much. And in your 20s, it's fun. And the people your age are out there. And I used to look out in the audience and say, oh my God, they're old. And then one day, I looked out and said, oh my God, they're young. And it's like, there's no warning, there's no ramp up. It just becomes, in my 20s, it was something. And then you get to your 30s and your 40s, it's like, boy, I'm hooked in this. I don't have any other people skills. I have to keep doing it.
All right. So important question I've asked many guests.
Go ahead.
The old line, the famous line is, dying is easy, comedy is hard. And I know it's probably impossible to really truly define, but I'll bet you're going to take a stab at it. What makes comedy difficult to do so well?
You have to get into somebody's head, their psyche, and try to figure out their taste and what makes them laugh. It's just like a restaurant. If you open up a restaurant that just said food, what kind of food is it? People want Mexican or Italian or Chinese, or there's different kinds. Comedy, there are many different tastes. Some people are working class and like it a little blue. Other people are eclectic and they're intelligent and they might get obscure references, and you never know. And you take the gig to pay the bills. So sometimes you're in a fornicatorium and they're not digging in your groove, man. They're not getting it. So you don't know how long 45 minutes is. And you don't start out doing 45 minutes. I started out doing 15 minutes as an opener. Here's a good example. I grew up in the North. I had a thing about the snow stomp. Now, you grew up in Pittsburgh. In the winter, you come in and there's snow and you stomp like a little kid.
Sure.
That went over great in the Rust Belt. I got down into North Carolina and South Carolina for a 6-week run. And I was just starting out. I was 23 years old. And I had to do 15 minutes. And about 8 of it was about winter snow. And it doesn't snow down there. So they're looking at me like a deer shined by car headlights, and I got to come up with 8 new. So where are you from? So what do you do? And that's a rude awakening. So it's real tough to come up. Comedy is hard to figure it out. I think that's why it takes a stand-up so long to actually hit, because you have to work all regions in America, not counting Canada. Maybe you work in the UK. People are different. Their speech patterns are different. Their words they use are different. It takes so long to develop and know where you are. I'll come to Pittsburgh. I'll have 10 or 15 minutes about Pittsburgh and Yunzers and John Eagle and Myron Cope and all these kind of things that only people in Pennsylvania know.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to go to, Idaho and talk about whatever they talk about there. And that's just, you're a salesman. You're a con man. A con man gains the confidence of their mark before they do the scam. Comedy is not necessarily, but the same principle exists in that I have to gain the confidence and the trust of the audience in that town to say, okay, he's one of us. I can trust and laugh at him now.
Well,
likability is a big thing too.
Like writers take time to develop what we call our voice.
Sure.
So that when you write, you're writing in your voice, whatever that is. And that's usually, or very rarely does that happen early in a writer's career. It takes a while to develop that. My assumption is it's pretty much the same thing with the comedian, that you have to figure out what your voice is too.
Well, I think rarely is I know there's exceptions to every rule. I can't think of one that has found it early. So I say never, because you talk to a 5-year-old about calculus. No, the 5-year-old's not going to get it. You got to go through the steps. You crawl before you walk, before you run. And I didn't have my voice. It was 20 years before I even.
Yeah. 20. You think it was 20 years before you knew your
before
voice?
I felt like it. George Carlin talks about it too. I mean, he said in his later years, he was basically a curmudgeon bitching about life. He goes, that was the only time that he thought he actually hit it.
But he was the most brilliant curmudgeon who's ever lived.
Oh, absolutely. No, he was.
I love George Carlin. George Carlin to me is the greatest stand-up comedian ever.
I can't argue with you. And I absolutely, I get a chance to meet him. Do you ever get a chance to meet him?
No, I saw him live once, but I never met him.
Now, I never saw him live, and I wish I would have done that. But he was coming through Chicago in his later years, and he had a girlfriend. His wife had passed away, and his girlfriend was trying to be a comedian, and I teach classes. And one of the Zanies Comedy Clubs, that's a big chain in Chicago. There were 4 clubs there, and they had a big one that had sat about 500 people, which is big for a comedy club. So to make a long story longer, I'm headlining there in the summer. In the summer, nobody comes out in the North. As you know, everybody wants to be outside. So there's literally 35 people in a 400 or 500 seat room. So the manager was a total curmudgeon woman. And she said, I want you off stage at this time and blah, 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 no snacks. George Carlin's coming in. Excuse me? Yeah, George Carlin was downtown and his girlfriend's going to do a guest set in front of you. And she didn't know George Carlin from George Clooney, from anybody. She's just basically a bar manager. Oh my gosh. So a couple minutes later, I'm talking to comedians and I tap on my shoulder and turn, hi, are you Dobie? I'm George. And he stuck his hand out. I know who you are, sir. And he goes, hey, listen, my girlfriend's going to do a guest set in front of you tonight. I hope that's okay. And they told me that you teach comedy classes. Maybe my girlfriend could sit in a couple of your classes. I said, Mr. Carlin, I've been a comedian for 30 years. Maybe I could sit in your class and listen to you talk about comedy. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. I heard you're really funny. Show me what you got. Could not have been more humble, more nice, more genuine. Every story I've ever heard about him, I mean, he was king, as you say, could afford to be arrogant, aloof. Never heard a story like that.
And simply the smartest comedian who's ever done comedy.
Not only was he the smartest comedian that ever did comedy, he was also able to articulate it in several different ways. He came up in radio. He had a partner. I don't know if you knew this. Jack Burns.
Jack Burns
was his partner. And then he went on his own, and then he became pretty straight. He had a suit and tie and short hair to go on some of those early TV shows. That's what's great about YouTube. I tell young comedians, go look at George Carlin. Then he became the hippy dippy guy. Then he grew a beard and his hair long. Then he morphed 3 different times as his career grew, which every good artist does. It was his period, his hippie period. And I got to ask him, I'm from Milwaukee. There's a famous thing with George Carlin getting arrested in Milwaukee at a music festival called Summerfest. And I asked him about that. I said, I was 10 years old when that happened. Could you tell me the story? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, as you know, there's rock stages everywhere. Nobody's listening. I'm just trying to get their attention. And the only people that were watching me were the Milwaukee cops, who were known to be abusive and mean and everything. So he said they were the only ones watching me. So I did this 7 words routine just to try to get somebody's attention. And the cops were the only ones that were listening. So they arrested me. And I had my drugs. I had a jean jacket. I gave the jean jacket to my wife. That's where the drugs were. And they took me down this, we know you're on drugs. And they searched me and they couldn't find it. So they arrested me and they let me go. So he says, otherwise they would hated me. They would have, make him do jail time in Milwaukee. But that's a very famous story. But Carlin could not have been any nicer. And when you like an artist and you meet them, did you ever meet one of your favorites? They say don't meet your heroes.
Oh, I have met a few, and I won't say their names. And I've met 1 or 2 that I was thoroughly impressed by. And I've met 1 or 2 that I was thoroughly dissatisfied with as humans.
Ditto.
That's the weird thing. When I first started off in show business 140 years ago, I thought to myself, I only knew them from movies and TV and from seeing them in the theater. And I used to think to myself at that age, well, I guess they don't smell bad and they don't have trouble because they're always doing great things on TV and in the movies. So, there's nothing, there can't be anything wrong with them. And then I started to meet them and I found out, oh, they're humans. They actually have all the human problems that we all have, except that they're famous and they're thought of in certain ways, and certainly on a pedestal in some ways. And they're not special humans, except that they're able to entertain us in some way, which makes them special. And I'm talking about famous people, really famous people. That was the big surprise to me is that some famous people are not the characters we think they are. That was surprising.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. I promoted pro wrestling for a while. I was a ring announcer, and I bought the ring and truck, and I booked the wrestlers.
Really?
It was really funny because the bad guys in the ring were the ones you'd leave your kids with and your pets. They're wonderful. Mr. America, that's the molester. Watch out for him. The good guy in the ring is the bad guy. It's weird how they morph those characters. The bad guys you love to hang out with. I hung out with all the bad guys.
Well, I've had the great privilege of interviewing Carrie Elwes twice, once live on the stage and once on this show on StoryBeat. And Carrie Elwes from Princess Bride. Worked with Andre the Giant. Right. And Andre the Giant would tell the story about kids would either run up to him or run away from him. One of those two, but nothing in between. And because he was this gigantic man, but he was as gentle as could be. And that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely true. It's funny. I was probably 12 when he came to Milwaukee, and I shook his hand. I loved wrestling as a kid. And the same thing. It's like, oh, you see this guy. And his stories of unbelievable flatulence. I'm sure Carrie had one.
He's got a great story in his book about it.
Okay. Yeah. Andre Giant would clear a room.
When he did that, it was on set and they were rolling camera. And he let one rip and nobody knew what to do. And then they started breaking out in laughter and everybody laughed and laughed and laughed. But apparently it shook the walls.
Yeah, they said it was a good 30 seconds. And sometimes you do it in the ring.
I'm just glad he didn't do it in a fornicatorium. That would be
Yeah,
a
no,
real problem.
that's a felony, I think, east of the Mississippi.
All right, let's talk about your process a little bit.
Sure.
When you start to develop a new set, I know you're going to work on a set for a long time. You've already said that. It's going to take you many, many iterations of it before you get it to where you want it or where it works.
Yes.
Where do you start? How do you start to develop a set?
Well, now with all these years of experience, I used to think, okay, walk through. Now I think people are talking to their phone, but I'm talking to pad and paper. You walk through the mall. Okay, what's funny about Walgreens? What's funny about Orange Julius? And you get outside. Eventually, the big turn in the creative process for stand-up comedy is getting inside yourself. Like you said, find my voice. I know my character, my persona. What do I think about it? How would George Carlin react to going to the mall versus how Richard Pryor would act? Okay, they have a persona and a character rather than just, Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal about diets? He became. I think it's got to come from within. So that I know my character at this particular point, and like a batting order in baseball, thinking, okay, somebody my age would want to talk about what subjects. So if I'm writing a new set, I say, okay, I need to write something. Now, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2011. So I'm working on a set. What's funny about diabetes? Okay, well, not a whole lot. You got to be really careful, but I think there needs to be a bit about that. So does that make sense? So I work backwards. Think, okay, what do I need in my batting order? And I'm going to do a 45 minutes to an hour set. Elvis talked about, he said, I need a strong opener and a strong closer. What I do in the middle really doesn't matter. And I think comedy, it does matter to a degree, but you have to have a strong opener to get their attention and bring them into your world. That is 3 to 5 minutes. And a strong closer to bang, 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 and dismount with a big laugh. What goes in between should build up to that. And I don't think most comedians, and I'm not talking down to anybody else, but I've studied this so much myself because I had to go with so many regions of thinking what could be universal enough that I can get everybody everywhere in every age group. Well, there isn't, but I did a lot of child material because I'm thinking, well, everybody's a child. If they're old or young, they were a child at some point. So I started out my career doing a lot of childhood stuff just because it bonded with some people. Now I'm working a fornicatorium. They drink, they're high, they're felons in a lot of places. Well, I never drank. I don't judge anybody. That's not what I did. So that was a challenge. Some saying come out to nightclubs. Then I got to a point where I would start doing, with soft seat theaters, and it wasn't necessarily the drunken crowd. That was more of my people. Does that make sense? So I think number one, know who you are. Number two, know what you want to talk about. Don't
when you say your
funny.
People, they got your taste.
They got my taste. They were in my demographic. I think any comedian needs to shoot for a demographic between 10 years younger and 10 years older. Not to say there are exceptions to every rule. Now, when I was in high school, Rodney Dangerfield was the greatest comedian in the world. He was in his 50s. I'm in my 50s now. I can't imagine working in front of high school kids. I would have zero to say. But what did he talk about? Not having, good luck with women, he did talk about doing drugs, which ended up he did. He talked a lot about a lot of the things that people my age were doing. I just thought his jokes were brilliant. But he was a big exception because he was pretty much a Borscht Belt guy, a holdover that appealed to my generation. I don't know if he was in yours, but I mean, when Caddyshack came out and
he was
Tonight Show, he was the king.
But he had that, and some comedians, not all comedians, but some comedians like him, and Joan Rivers and others like that, they have one line that they're able to build their act around all the time. In his case, it was, nobody gives me any, I got no respect.
I get no respect.
I get no
Exactly
respect.
Right. Go ahead.
So I was going to say that he was able to build that act around that. And then, as you say, a kid could relate to that because kids don't feel like they get any respect from anybody. So they relate to it.
Absolutely. And I think everybody thinks they get no respect. Now, there's some different rumors and things or that he kind of borrowed it from somebody else. There's a guy named Joe Ansis. It's a name that pops up. He was big in the comedy scene back then, and Rodney hung out with him. A lot of people did, and he would never go on stage. And a lot of people basically took a little bit of Joe Ansis with him. And that happens from time to time. There are creative people, talented people that never get on stage, especially comedy. Larry David was a horrible comedian. The crowds hated him. He found his niche later, but I mean, comedians would loved him, but he wasn't popular. Rodney, I got a chance to meet him too, right before he passed. And I talked about that. Rodney, when you came up, he goes, hey kid, it took a long time to get to the groove. I listened to his later stuff. He's bang, 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 bang. That's how I am. Listen to his earlier albums. If you're a student of stand-up comedy, he's got a couple of albums that came out in the late 60s, early 70s. They're nothing like He does some of the same lines, but he's very slow. Then it talks almost like Jackie Mason, and his rhythm is different. And I think your rhythm has to fit your age, has to fit your material. It's like a meal in a restaurant. You have to have, it's got to complement each other, and it's all got to form into one. That's the hard part. How he dressed: black suit, red tie, white shirt. He didn't always dress that way on stage. He didn't. And when he, in later years, he came on the Tonight Show one time, he had like a leisure suit on almost. It's like, well, that's not Rodney. Rodney's got red tie. That's his thing. So not very few people, I would say 1% hit on all cylinders like a Rodney did. And Joan Rivers talked about, can we talk? And her deal
Right.
celebrity.
It's that one line.
But I think that, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's for a stand-up comedian or an actor, the public's probably got room for 2 or 3 in their head. You ask the average person on the street, who's your favorite comedian? John Belushi. Well, he died in 1982 and he was never a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Carson. Well, he went off the air in 1992. But the average public, to ask who they think and who someone in the business thinks. I mean, you could name me 50 writers I've never heard of who are magnificent talents. I could name you 100 comedians that you've never heard of.
That's because that's your world.
Right. And the public's world is completely different.
Sure.
And that's the hard part. Some people, work into the back of the room. It's called comedy. All the comedians in the back think you're the greatest thing in the world, and the crowd stare at you. And then someone gets to be a crowd pleaser, and the comedians say, how is that funny? And I could name some names, which I don't want to do because they've had successful careers.
Sure.
I could name you 4 or 5 people, and the crowd, people, oh my gosh, they're wonderful. And comedians just turn up their noses. Like, the public wants that.
Well, that's like sitcoms. I used to be a huge sitcom fan, and most sitcoms now don't make me laugh anymore.
Sure.
I think I've become habituated to that style of comedy, and it's just, to me, it's not funny anymore. And then, so it has to be a little bit crasser or a little bit edgier. It has to be Curb Your Enthusiasm or Veep or something like that, that has a real cutting part to it for me personally. So the standard NBC, CBS, ABC sitcoms, they don't make me laugh anymore. That's part of what you're talking about. I also think that comedians who you're talking about, the public doesn't know who comedians are. I think unless a comedian gets on a show or becomes a movie star, they generally speaking don't know who they are. And then they learn them after they become somewhat in a movie or TV mode. So your Kevin Hart's of the world eventually start doing movies, and then they become much more popular in the public.
That's a really good point. And I think I look at a Kevin Hart, and I have nothing but respect for him. And I don't want to sound this by being pompous. I don't find him funny. I don't see it.
He's a specific thing. He's a certain kind of taste, and he's not going to be everybody's taste. But clearly he's very popular, and
absolutely.
And what you're saying is he's just not your cup of tea. That's all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of comedians and any artist can get arrogant, and I don't mean that at all. I look at that and think, okay, he is not my cup of tea, but I respect what he's done to put himself in the public eye. And
sure.
I think finding the public's taste is a skill in and of itself that smart people, I think you have it or you don't.
All right.
And
so question that I think is hard to answer is, what makes a good joke good?
Jackie Mason said years ago, he said, I've been doing comedy 50 plus years. Every joke I tell is a guess. It's an educated guess. And I've got 50 plus years of experience, but the audience is always the judge. And it can be maddening. You think this is a good joke. I think it's a good joke. My comedian friends over dinner thought it was a good joke. I went out in public and it just lays there, and they're the judge. They buy the tickets. They are the judge, jury, and you have to respect that. And there are people, hey, come on, that's funny. Blah, blah, blah. But if you got to tell them it's not funny, and that's, I think, what separates the true stars from the professional working stiffs. That there are people that just, they have that, like music. We could talk about Bruce Hornsby. I heard Bruce Hornsby. I was coming through some town on NPR. I didn't know who it was until after the interview. And I caught in the middle. He said, I talked to my daughter, and my daughter said, Dad, why does all the music on the radio stink? And he said, I came and I hugged my daughter. I said, honey, you and I are deeper into music. There's 3 chords that 90% of the public is satisfied with. We need more than that to be stimulated. You just said the sitcoms don't make you laugh because your surprise level has been pushed back.
That's it.
You talk about comedians talking to each other jokes and the memes we send each other. It would be a felony on what we have on our phones, because we have to go that much farther to just, like the heroin addict, the first hit. Oh, that's great. But now you got to take a triple dose and you don't get the same high.
It's a storytelling element called habituation. when an audience becomes habituated to a level of some kind of energy, or how a joke is, or how stories are told, or how violent movies are. When they become habituated to it, then the next generation has to take it to the next level, because they've become habituated and they're bored by it. Even though you and I thought it was great in the 1970s, the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2020s, it's no longer that violent or that funny or that offbeat. It's habituation.
My question is, where does it end? At some point, it's like, okay, how much more violent, how much more filthy, how much more, people, dirty comedians. It's when I first started in comedy, people would say, you're a comedian. Are you funny? Now you're a comedian. Are you dirty? Comedy has devolved. Used car salesman, child molester, comedian. That's where it is. Well, because so many people have done it poorly.
Of course, when you go on stage, correct me if I'm wrong, the one advantage that you have going on, I shouldn't say the one, but one of the major advantages you have is someone has come to a place where they're planning to see comedy. So they're already primed in their head that they're going to see comedy. They're going to be listening for jokes or something funny. And then someone announces you as a comedian. So now they're primed a second time. But if you just showed up at a shopping mall and stood in front of a store and started telling jokes, people would look at you like you were out of your mind, right?
Absolutely. Yes, it's totally true.
So that priming is part of the process, isn't it?
But it is. But the scenario you just described, I worked cruise ships on and off for about 10 years. And there's people wandering around. They see people, oh, there's a karaoke. I think well, there's a room full of people and the guy's talking. What's that? They've never seen a comedy show. They wander in. Those are some of the worst audiences ever. And I've been at this my whole life, Steve. I got on stage and ate cheese off the big wheel, as they say. It took a while to really have to dumb it down. And it's just the way it is. So you're totally right. I think the comedy fans, like the jazz aficionado that loves to come to see the latest avant-garde musician, there's too few of them in comedy that want to seek out the next thing. If you're not doing fart jokes and hitting them over the head, a lot of times, I mean, to get seen, you got to pay your bills. So if you're out in LA trying to get seen, that's different than being in Duluth in some hellhole with a pool table that's moved and a stage is there doing comedy, but you need that $200 to pay your rent. So from artist to professional, I had a job in comedy for 35 years. I sniffed around a career, but I had a job. Big difference.
Did you ever feel like you were working at the job, or did it always feel like there was a certain degree of fun to it at the same time?
The time on stage can be fun. Sometimes you have a long run at a club for a week and it's like, these people, it's just not my thing. I could tell the first night I'm not going to be back here, but you got to fill 52 weeks on your schedule. And sometimes you have to be in a place that you don't like. So yeah, it got to be a grind after a while with life in the way. I mean, with really quickly, I had a situation for several years that played out. My best friend robbed a bank that he used to work at. Oh. He tried to blame it on me. Oh. And I had to wear a wire for the government to get him to confess that he did. That's my book, Monkey in the Middle. And so that played out over about 4 years. So I had to still go on stage and be funny. There was about a 6-week period I was on the road where during the day, this is before cell phones, I'd have to get up on the phone and talk to my lawyer for like 6 hours trying to keep myself out of prison, because there was a time when they thought that I did it and I had to go on stage and be funny that night. And years later, I went back to the clubs and said, if I was aloof, they said, yeah, we thought you were a complete ass, man. You would just do your shit set. You're really funny and people liked you. And then you just leave. You wouldn't talk to anybody. I said, well, I had to get some sleep. So I had to get up. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We thought you were an asshole.
Wow. That must have been nerve-wracking. You must have been.
It is nerve-wracking, but that's part of being a professional.
Well, sure.
Of course. I think, and looking back at it now, you just suck it up and did it. I had nowhere else to go. I had no choice. I had to deal with it.
So what did you do? How did you get through it? What mental games did you give yourself to get through it?
I think you have to compartmentalize where your life is versus your stage act, and that can be really hard to do. And some people, I have booking agents tell me that, we can tell what kind of day you're having. If you're having a great day, you're the funniest guy in the world. If you're having a rotten day, somebody heckles you, you'll rip their head off. And I'm thinking, boy, that's kind of true. And again, these are things you have to learn over time to get to be a consummate professional. Now it's to the point where I've worked for so many people over the years and gone through all these phases that people say, I can put you in front of bikers. I can put you in front of nuns. I can put you in front of Girl Scouts. I can put you in front of senior citizens, and you can pull off a show.
Are you able to adjust on a dime like that?
Yeah, because it comes from decades of experience. I don't want to be that guy. It's like the utility infielder in baseball. Every team needs a utility infielder. The fans usually can't name them. They make a nice living, but they're not the superstar.
Right.
So I became the utility infielder, and I had to take those gigs because I needed the money all those years. Didn't have a family, dented can out of myself since I was 19. So I had to say, okay, I don't really want to do this particular gig, but I need it rather than have an empty schedule. So I became that way by, how can I say, by necessity.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the questions that I ask a lot of people too is, clearly a career in comedy is filled with certain pressures.
Sure.
You have a pressure to get to the gig on time. You
Mm.
have the pressure to perform well. You have pressure on stage. You've got pressure to come up with new material. There's all these pressures. Do you have any particular technique that you use to deal with pressure when you're feeling under pressure? Is there anything psychologically that you do for yourself? Is it
That's
exercise? Is it food? Is there something you do?
It used to be. A lot of comedians I know have turned to substances. I
Mhm.
never did that. I don't claim to be holier than thou. It just wasn't my thing.
Mhm.
I don't judge anybody if that. A lot of them did it that way. Exercise is one of them. But if I'm driving in a car for 10 hours, who's got time to go to the gym or work out? I just kind of plowed through it. And that could be a lot of stress. And maybe that's why I got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The heaviest thing I lift is a microphone. The most exercise I walk is from the dressing room to the stage. So it's not a lifestyle that's conducive to good health, but there's a lot of entertainers have problems, but especially comedians. The road is constant. It's always there. Anything that is your nemesis is constant. You have a good show, you celebrate. You have a bad show, you drink. Is
there anything that you look forward to aside from getting up on stage in front of people? I assume you do look forward to that.
Yeah, I used to love seeing new places and just meeting people I haven't met before. And I have so many friends around the country. I can go to pretty much any, even halfway major city and have someone I could sleep on their couch or have someone have lunch with. So it took a long time to build that. But as you evolve, and I think all artists and creative people should evolve, I will just as happily call you on a Zoom call. And I want to be somewhere and be able to create, because so much energy is expelled getting to that gig. I got to drive there 8 hours, but people don't realize you got to drive 8 hours back.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? And just that money that you mean, now it's instead of one night, it's a night getting there, a night there, and a night coming back. So that's 3 nights. It's the money doesn't go as far as you think it did. Does that make sense?
And it's grueling at the same time.
It's a grind. And in my 20s and 30s, it was fun. Then I wanted to get into radio for stability. Then I started getting fired in radio.
That's a great segue. Let's talk about radio, because you've worked many different radio gigs, right?
Yes. I'm the only person I know that has been fired in all 4 time zones in the continental United States. Steve, you know how hard it is to get fired in the mountain time zone? I did it.
What a badge of honor.
It's like hitting for the cycle in baseball. I got Salt Lake City, Utah, Reno, Nevada, Milwaukee, Chicago, Lansing, Michigan. I've been everywhere.
But I bet you've never worked the Antarctic.
Never worked the Antarctic. No, I never did Hawaii. I was in Hawaii one day on a cruise ship, and it rained, of course.
And it rained
rained in Honolulu. Yeah, exactly.
That is part of your act, is it not? That if you didn't have bad luck, you'd have no luck at all, right?
Mr. Lucky. Yeah, exactly. And somebody came up with that, and I said, that's a really good hook. And in theory, like communism, it sounded good on paper. But Alice Cooper said he didn't know where Alice ended and Vince, the real guy, started. And
Vince Fournier.
It's Fournier. Okay. So, he had some problems with that. And again, I don't want to be Mr. Lucky off stage. And so many bad things were happening. I just kind of abandoned that. And again, for a few years, it kind of worked. And now I'm not doing that anymore. But it's okay. You got to try all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, like I said, nobody finds their voice early. And I don't know anybody that's really found it in the first time. I talk about Pittsburgh, Dennis Miller, who I happen to really enjoy his comedy.
Me too.
And he started doing props. People don't realize it. You try stuff when you start. You do.
Well, don't a lot of really successful comedians start out imitating somebody else first?
Absolutely. Sure. I think everybody does. Why do 3-year-old toddlers in the South have Southern accents? Well, they imitate the people around them.
Sure.
Same with comedians. You have an idea what a comedian should say or think or do, and you become that person until it peels off and you say, oh, okay, this is me doing that. And that takes years.
So let's talk about the difference between stand-up comedy and radio. You're still doing comedy, right?
Mm-hmm. In short spurts. And that happened to be a style that I could do. It's a lot of times you have to be quick and say the joke in 20 seconds or less, then they'll play the jingle and go to the commercial. And it's like a blonde with big boobs. If you can do that on the radio, you're going to get a job somewhere. I kept getting jobs.
Were most of the shows you did, I know you did a lot of morning shows, right?
All morning shows. That's it.
And so the morning shows typically where there's somebody talking or several people talking, like the morning zoos and all the rest of it.
That's what it is. Yes.
But then did you do shows where there was also music being played, or was it just talk?
No, it was always music being played.
There was always music being played.
Always music played.
So you had a little time in between when the songs were playing.
A lot.
To kind of like adjust things as you were going, correct?
Sure. And it's little short spurts, and whatever they call it the topic A. What's everybody talking about topic A today? So it's in the paper. You decide it's going to be this. So you plan out, say, okay, I've got 4 breaks an hour. I'm on the air for 4 hours. What little nuggets am I going to do in those 4 breaks?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it over again. See what I'm saying? Because nobody listens to a morning show for 4 hours straight. It's usually 10 to 30 minutes. So you do this bit at 6:20, and you do it again at 8:20.
Really?
Can you make it funnier? Can you add a couple of jokes to it? Now, I always like to write my own stuff. They have services that write jokes. When I got into radio, I came in as a comedian, and my first owner said, "Oh, here's a big stack of stuff that our last guy used." It's like, well, I'm going to write my own jokes. And he just, what? No one has ever done that before. So, well, that's part of the fun. I want to come up with my own stuff. I'll read the paper. And so then I started doing it, and it was the other stages like, where's he getting all this stuff? What services he subscribed to? No, I did it myself because I had the joke writing chops from stand-up.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that you would repeat things within that 4-hour block.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yes.
And when you're working with other people, you can't just write your own individual stuff, right? You have to be interacting with people.
You have to interact with people, but they'll say, okay, we're going to talk about, I can't even think of an example about some explosion that happened. And you have to be very sensitive on the radio too, because in a comedy club, you get a little more leeway. You know, as far as taste goes on the radio, you offend a sponsor, that's the death of deaths. You got to have a sixth sense what not to do. Every joke doesn't have to be in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that, but you have to have you got to have a spider sense to know what's good and bad. So I had that, and I could come up with a quick joke in 20 seconds or less, and that's the formula for morning radio. Whereas in stand-up, you're doing the same jokes every night to some different audience. But you got people they'll come up to you. I heard that joke you did 6 months ago. I had to drive off the road. I was laughing so hard. It's a cumulative effect. They know more about you, your life. So you have more of a history with the regular listeners that you don't as a stand-up. It's the first time they've seen you.
Well, you're burning through material fast on the radio. Yes.
Absolutely true.
And on the road, you're honing the material. You're
honing the material. So I mean, back in the vaudeville days, they would do the same act for 20 years.
Sure.
Then, you get on TV, that's maybe there's 50s and 60s and the Borscht Belt. Maybe you might do it a little bit sooner than that. You get on TV with it, then you come up with another one. Now, people have their phone in the audience before it's even polished. They'll have it out on YouTube, and you didn't put it up there. So that's a problem. It is.
And the comedians who become legendary. So let's talk about Seinfeld or Steve Martin, or Robert Klein or George Carlin and so on. Once they have done their act for a while and enough people have seen it, or more importantly, they get an HBO special or something like that, then that act is pretty much burned, right?
It absolutely is. And they would say, okay, they'd polish it and hone it, then record it, and then it's finished. So it'll be out there, and then they would start again. Now, you mentioned you have really great taste in comedy because you brought up all my favorite names. Robert Klein, I believe, had 10 HBO specials. George Carlin was up there too. And these were 90-minute specials, not 60-minute specials or 30-minute specials. That's a lot of material. So to be as prolific as they were, unbelievable respect to come up with that much. And people say, well, I watched one of his specials. It wasn't that good. You crank out 90 minutes.
No kidding. And again, you're back to, well, it wasn't that good. Well, your taste may have shifted. Absolutely. And that comedian's comedy may be just as good as it always was, but your taste has changed.
Your taste has changed, but you're watching a special from 1982, and the scene was different then. The internet has, like it or not, and most people don't, it has sped up the world 100-fold.
Oh boy, has it ever.
And I think, to hone a craft and stuff, that just doesn't, you can see a TikTok and somebody belching or farting or something like that. And I think the attention span is frighteningly short, and the sophistication level. My stuff has never been, rocket science, but it's like a reference. People don't get references.
Well, it's so hard. Would you say that a lot of your comedy is topical? It's happening right now?
No, zero. And Steve Martin had a good thing. I read this in the 70s. He goes, there was a lot of social unrest back then. He goes, I put on a white suit. He had a beard and long hair. He would open up for the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. They were his friends. And he said, I wanted my character to never have read a newspaper and to not have the, political, the tension and that. So he came up with a white suit to symbolize basically neutrality. And he took it in a completely different direction. And all it did was sell out arenas and stadiums for the first time. He hit a nerve that nobody did.
I saw Steve Martin live at the Universal Amphitheater before there was a roof on the amphitheater in 1976.
Okay.
And guess what? He was the opening act for Janis Ian.
No kidding.
Believe that or not. So Steve Martin comes out and does, as the opening act for Janis Ian, does Crazy Feet, does the arrow through the head, does the balloon, does all the shtick that he became famous for early on. The audience he was taking pictures, snapping pictures of the audience instead of them. Right. He was doing all the shtick that he did way back then. And the audience was absolutely over the moon. And then Janis Ian came out and nobody wanted to listen to her.
Wow.
It was the complete opposite of what it was supposed to be. He should not have been the warm-up act.
I'm surprised that's an unusual pairing.
Well, it's a very unusual pairing, but nevertheless, this was before he was just on the verge of breaking. He was like where he's just about to become humongous. And so he was now famous for some of this stuff. I think he might have already done one appearance on Saturday Night Live or something like that. And then Janis Ian comes out and it's like, well, we don't want to hear this. We've just been laughing for this whole time. And she's singing dour songs about life. It's like,
poor Janis Ian. Did you ever happen to read his biography, Born Standing Up? I highly recommend it.
I have not read it, but I would love to.
Not only reading it is great, but he's got an audio version, which I'll dig it out and send it to you.
I just did read, talking about bios, I just read All About Me, which is the Mel Brooks autobiography.
Oh, love it. I have it, yes.
Just fantastic. It's laugh out loud funny. He's as funny on paper as he is talking.
There's somebody I think is totally unnatural. He just
unnatural.
Is funny. He's got it in him. Comedy is in him. He could do it. My grandpa was a natural that I grew up with. And he said, kid, you got it.
Can you make somebody who is not necessarily funny naturally, can you take the talents, whatever they have, and help them to become funny?
I can help them become funnier. And there's a big difference. I can't create it. But if you have what you have, Pete Rose didn't have as many athletic skills as a lot of the stars, but he outworked everybody and has the most hits in baseball. There's formulaic things you can do. You have to work at it. You have to work very hard at the logistics of things I talk about putting it together. That's why I call it the Maxwell Method. Colonel Sanders did not claim to invent fried chicken. He put his name and his face on the bucket, and he had a style in his own recipe. That is my recipe in comedy. I've made every mistake there is to make on stage and off. So I'm thinking, okay, Steve wants to start doing comedy tomorrow. Here are some things. So the first things you have to do, and you build a foundation. Everything I did wrong, I'll tell you so you can do it correctly. That's why I put my name on the bucket.
All right. So how did you manage to work gigs at night and do a morning show?
Talk about I'm surprised I wasn't on speed. I was like a fourth shift. I would wake up about 4:00 in the afternoon, like Elvis. I would eat a somewhat healthy dinner, do a comedy show, stay up all night, do the morning show, and then go to bed at 10:00 in the morning.
Wow. That must have really been grueling.
I'm sure it took some years off my life. But again, most of the radio jobs I had before I got fired, it's only about a year in a town. So then I'll go back on the road. And there are clubs that I was booked 3 or 4 times that I never have worked because I got the radio job. And I kept both feet. I should have picked one or the other in retrospect, but woulda, coulda, shoulda. We all have that.
Do you prefer one over the other?
I want normal, Steve. Whatever that is in life, I didn't have it.
So it surprises me you didn't go and become a sitcom writer where you're like Ed wound up doing a whole bunch of that where he was in one place.
I think Ed had one of the funniest human beings.
And again, we're talking about Ed Driscoll.
Ed Driscoll. Go back and listen to that episode because he is just an awesome person, a great friend, a great comic. He's got it. And on stage, he decided that he wanted to have a quote unquote normal life. So he made an LA plan. I did not make an LA plan. I was going through bank robbery, trying to keep myself out of jail. I was on the road all the time. I was in Reno when I got fired. I'm thinking, okay, it's closer for me to drive to LA when I got fired than drive back to Chicago. That's the only reason I moved to LA. And I started knowing people there, and that's like, this is going okay. And then I ran out of money. And we talked about this before we got on here. The LA experience is a whole different thing because I'm thinking, do I want to get a day job and try it, or do I want to go back and do what I like to do? So my choice at the time was go back on the road and do comedy. Should have stayed there. Didn't.
So in other words, you've made a series of choices at forks in the road, and sometimes the forks worked and sometimes they didn't.
Most times they didn't, Steve. I wish they would have. And I look back on it. And that's why I am a great teacher, because I have screwed up. The best carpenter to learn from is got the least amount of fingers. He has sawed them off, man. He'll tell you how he lost those fingers. And the same thing, it's like, yeah, we all can look back and say, I had a chance. Now, whatever creative profession that you're in as you listen to this, what if you had a chance to have a one-on-one session with the top money earner? I don't care if it's actor, comedy, sitcom, musician, whatever. I had a chance. And this guy said, kid, you're really funny. I was an opening act. He was a headliner. We were in Detroit, Michigan. He said, I want to buy you lunch tomorrow and run a concept by you that's going to make $1 million. And I heard, like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 buy you lunch. That's what I heard. I'm 25 years old, whatever it was. I showed up the next day, and he's got his 3x5 cards out and his little spiral notebook. He goes, here's my idea. I want you to come with me. I think you can help me out. You can write it for me. He goes, my concept is you might be a redneck if, and then I do jokes. So in my 25-year-old wisdom, I said, that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my entire life. He said, why do you say that? I said, well, that's a bit out of Mad Magazine. I read when I was 9. You might be a blank if, what a dumb formula. I said, you're a great guy, but that's not going anywhere. He goes, well, I beg to differ. I think I'm going to make $1 million. And I got right in his face. I said, $1 million, $1 million. I said, you're a cool guy, man. I want no part of this. Okay. And it was Jeff Foxworthy, and he's the highest paid comedy entertainer for several years in a row. And I am doing your podcast, and I'm glad to be on it. And that is a true story. I saw him many years later. He said, you know what? You weren't the only person that told me I was full of it, but you got right in my face, man. $1 million, $1 million. And I didn't see it, but he had a vision of what the public liked. And I couldn't be any happier for him. He's a great guy. He is truly a genuine human being. And if anybody deserves massive success, it's Jeff Foxworthy. But I didn't see it then. I totally see it now. And he had that. He's a few years older than me, but not many. And I have nothing but respect for him. I didn't see it.
Well, there again, we're going back to somebody who has a line, and they build the whole act around that line. Yep. And so it is Rodney Dangerfield, only you might be a redneck if.
Here's the thing, though, and he told me, he said, it got to the point where he said, I hated it after a while because I'm trying to do my act. And I think Jeff's a funny guy. I worked with him several times. And he said they'd be redneck. That's all they wanted to hear.
Of course. Well, of course. It's like Larry the Cable Guy. That's all they want is, all his shtick as well. So
there's another guy. It's like I work with him coming up, and he did that as a radio call-in character.
Oh, is that right?
His name is Dan Whitney, and he's a really nice guy. And he's not even from the South. He's from Omaha, Nebraska. And he was on a radio show in the South, and he called up, and it's Ron and Ron in, I think it was Tampa, what they were. And he was a radio character, and that particular thing took off. And again, the public is the judge. He's got to be that guy with the sawed off, sleeves and everything like that. He's not anything like that in real life, but that's his character.
That's the act. That's the act.
Dice Clay, when I first started out, he was doing impressions of John Travolta, Sylvester Stallone. The Dice Man was just a part of it. I saw him start out. I was barely starting out, and he was nothing like that. The character was a little bit, but that's what the public bought, and he became the Dice Man.
Well, Tim Allen, same thing.
Oh, here's another one. I'm glad you brought that up. Tim Allen's another one. We worked together in Milwaukee at the Funny Bone, where at Driscoll and I worked, and they had this tour. Some wine was touring, and the local club owner said, this guy's coming through. He's going to be a big star. They're really pumping him. I'm going to put you in front of him, get to know him. You can go far with him. And I went up there and I rocked. It's Milwaukee. It's my hometown. And I watched his whole set as Tim Allen. Power tools and taking a dump. That was the only 2 premises he talked about for an hour. I'm thinking, how's that going to go anywhere? So we're backstage, and he wasn't he wasn't the nicest guy that night. I mean, whatever. We kind of talked about sports, and he's a Detroit Lions fan, and I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. And we talked about who was worse, the Lions of the 70s or the Packers of the 70s. And we agreed that they both sucked. But as far as comedy goes, I did not see that happening. And that was about 6 months after Foxworthy. So I had all these opportunities right in my hand, Steve, and I didn't see it. But I think I had to go through that stage. So now I can tell young comics, hang in there. You got a vision. Don't listen to anybody else. Listen to you. Listen to your soul.
So, all right, for a moment, I just want to know, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, is what is the Mothership Connection, which is not comedy, right?
No, that was about werewolves and flying saucers. And
Where'd
the
that
station,
come from?
That's a George Clinton album. I like George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic.
No, I
don't
mean,
know
where
what.
did that come from for you?
The station owner came up to me and said, "We need somebody. We want the owner wants a paranormal radio show. We need somebody that's stable enough to show up every week and crazy enough to pull it off. And you're the only one we think that could even come close to that." So I said, "Okay, just let me do what I do, and we'll see what it's like an Art Bell type of show." And we started doing it, and it just was so much fun. And it became, first it was 2 hours, then it was 3 hours, then it was 4 hours. And I couldn't get all the guests on because I respected them. I said, "Look, I'm going to have fun with you, but I'm not going to make fun of you. Okay, if you come on the radio and tell me that you had a big green finger in you and a UFO, I'm going to do jokes about it, but I'm not going to no disrespect as a human being." And the word spread, and I was getting the greatest guests in the country. And whether you believe that stuff or not, it's entertaining radio. So I made it a fun show.
Well, it's the National Enquirer, right?
It was that's a great way to put it. That's exactly what it was. And it was a blast.
It's Bat Boy, whatever's
Bat
coming.
Boy, exactly. The vampire woman and the pyramids, all that stuff.
So I
Bigfoot.
do also want to talk about Monkey in the Middle. So this is this is a nonfiction book about your life, right?
About my life, but the main focus is the bank robbery.
The bank robbery. So we've alluded to that. So tell us a little more about what the book entails.
Well, I think people want to know about the comedy process, what makes you a comedian, talk about growing up. My dad was a biker. My mom abandoned 3 babies. I was 5 months old. So my grandpa said I had to adopt you because I didn't know where they're going to send you. Your dad, I could never reach him. I wanted to reach you. And comics have tragic stories. Most of the good ones do. They just most of them are not functional.
Doesn't most comedy come from tragedy? Isn't the old line that comedy isn't the old line that comedy is tragedy plus time?
Yeah, but there wasn't any time. I got thrown into the 5 months old. So it got to the point where, that was it. People want to know about that. But my best friend, since we're kids, I think everybody, I'm sure you had one growing up, the best friend. And he decided he wanted to turn into a criminal. And I got fired from a radio station. And I called him up and I said, I was head security at a bank. And I said, "Let's go someplace warm, man. It was in December. It's cold outside. I'm going to put a bullet in my head, man." And he goes, "Well, where do you want to go?" I said, "How about Las Vegas? I've never been there before." He goes, "When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow morning would be good. I'll rent a car. I got a cousin who's laid off from his carpenter job. 3 guys will drive from Milwaukee to Vegas. We'll cool out for a week in the sun." All right. So while I was renting the car and picking up my cousin, my best friend since childhood robbed the bank he used to work at. He had $105,000 of stolen bank money in 2 satchels in the back of my rental car as we drove from Milwaukee to Las Vegas. We stayed there for a week. He didn't act like he had any money. He didn't tell me he did it till almost a year later. And then he dropped it on me. He said, "Well, the FBI is coming down on me pretty good. I had to tell you." Oh my God, why are you telling me now? And then I didn't say anything. The cops didn't show up. So another year went by. And I had a car accident. I flipped a convertible over and I almost died. Broke my sternum a couple of times. That's the hardest bone in your body to break. Had to learn how to walk all over again. And I'm living in one of his houses. He bought one of those no money real estate courses. I'm living in one of his houses. And I didn't know when I moved in that he had bought it with stolen bank money. So now I'm in it and I can't say anything. We're the only 2 that know. And he shows up one morning and says, "Hey, you want to go out to breakfast?" Okay. And I don't have a car because he got wrecked. And I didn't have any money because I was down and out as a comedian. So I'm sitting in his car thinking we're going to breakfast. And he drives, and about 2 blocks later, he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm going to rob the bank again." It's like, "You're going to what?" He goes, "Here's what I want you to do." And I said, "Here's what I want you to do. Turn around and drop me off. And you're an idiot." He goes, "Look, man, it's the only thing I love. Our whole life we've been friends. You got into comedy, they treated you bad. You tried out for baseball, you didn't make it. You got into radio, you kept getting fired, but you never gave up. You had passion, and I respect that. I never had passion about anything until I robbed the bank the first time. I love doing it. I love planning it. It was the best fun thing I've ever done." And I was down and out at the lowest point of my life. I said, "Will this make you happy?" He goes, "Yes. I'm just asking to stand across the street and watch me go in. I got this costume. That bank manager fired us, and they got the $6 an hour rent-a-cops in there, and I want to teach him a lesson." Okay. So I'm standing in front of the bank. I don't know what he's going to do. And about 10 minutes later, he parked the car, and I see coming around the bank a man in a gorilla mask, tuxedo, and helium balloons. Steve, it's like a gorillagram. He got the idea. There's a real guy that did a gorillagram downtown. He stole the idea. And he decided, and he went in there, And long story short, he got away with the money and he tried to blame it on me. And I had to wear a wire for the government, get him to confess that he did it. All this time that it played out, I was on the road trying to do comedy and keep it quiet. It was absolute torture. And those are my prime years when I should have been in LA and I should have been knocking on doors and doing all the things that comedians do. But I couldn't do that at the time. So I ended up testifying against him. He went to prison and it was the most horrific experience in my life. But it's a great story.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
20 years. I didn't want to go back there in my head. It was so painful. He was my best friend.
So it literally took you 20 years to write?
20, not 20 years of writing, but 20 years to get into my head when I did it. When I actually wrote it, it was about, I stopped watching football, which I never did. But I had a guy that was an editor. He was an assistant dean at Marquette University, and I did him some favors. And he said, look, I'll edit the book for you, but you got to give me a chapter and don't go away for 6 months. So I said, well, I need some time. He goes, do you watch football? I said, yeah. He goes, stop watching football. Get up on Sunday morning and start writing and write all day until you can't and go to bed. And the first couple weeks I was going through withdrawal because I've been a football fan my whole life. And then sure enough, week 4 or 5, I did it. So in a 16-week season, I cranked out that whole book, but it took me 20 years to get in a mindset when I was ready to do it, but it flowed like water. I'll send you a copy if you want. No one has ever said, I'm confident in it. I didn't make it up. I just put down what happened. People say, oh my God, this should be a movie.
So it's a total nonfiction book.
Total nonfiction. Oh, I'm not smart enough to make something like that up.
And did you did you make it funny? Or did you?
Yeah, I put some funny parts in there. There was a lot of funny parts in there, but it's like there was salty and sweet. There's sad parts. There's funny parts. It's like life. And it's poignant. People say, man, I laughed and I cried at the same book. I said, well, I think that's good then.
All right. So I'm curious about your teaching abilities. You've been teaching for a while. Or you taught for how long?
25 years.
25 years. And you've taught over 3,000 students.
Yes.
And do you enjoy it?
I love it. I love it almost as much as comedy, like a little league coach, because I've had people that have had their dream to get up on stage in front of their friends and family. And the graduation shows, I said, look, you know what? This is a free space on a bingo card. It's not like this all the time. I'll put together 5 minutes and I'll help you walk through it. I host the shows. I'm like the mother hen and my little hen, chicklees go up there and they do their 5 minutes and I give them a little certificate. They graduated and it means so much to them. It's on my wall and people from all walks of life. I thought it'd be people like me that wanted to be a comedian. There are people, the lawyers, teachers, ministers, mothers, whatever it is. And they had that was the biggest night of my life. And 20 years later, they'll say, oh, you're my hero. I just love it. And it's that alone, to be able to do that for humanity, makes me happy.
So what is the single most challenging thing about teaching people who are not comedians to do comedy? What's challenging?
Well, I think the challenge is to give them self-confidence to do it. Because everyone down their whole life, yeah, you're not funny. What are you doing this for? I said, look, they're not here right now. I am here. I am your mentor. I am your friend. I am your encourager. I'm also your tormentor. Don't not work at it. I don't care if you bring bad jokes. We can fix those. Being lazy and not doing it. Okay, there's one thing about having a fantasy. There's another thing about doing the work to get to it. And I think the challenge I really enjoy about teaching is some students I have to kick in the ass. Some students I have to pat on the head. It's up to me as a teacher to look at each one individually. And I say, look, I don't want you to be little Dobies up here. I want you to be the first you. But to do that first 5 minutes, there's a lot that comes to that. You really can't even think about being a comedian in my eyes unless you've been on stage 100 times, a minimum of that. And that's a lot. Well, I have a job. I can't go to the open mic. Okay, well, if you go once a week, that's 2 years to get you 100 times. If you want to be a comedian, that's what you got to do. And after 100 times, I can teach you anything that's going to happen. But that's like teaching a kindergartner calculus. You're not ready for that yet. Get on stage, forget your material. Have somebody good go on in front of you and smoke the room and you're dug in a hole. Have somebody bad go on in front of you. So you have to, there's all these things you have to experience before you can even think about scratching the surface. And I said, it took me 30 whatever years to know what to tell you to do. And once they start wobbling and they get up there and you can see it's in their eyes and they come up with a joke that works. I said, okay, that joke worked. Let's back up a little bit. Now let's add an extra premise in that. Comedy's 3, as we well know. Most people know that. Comedy's in 3s, but if you come up with one joke, you should have either 2 taglines, which go from the joke before that, or 3 good jokes in a row. So I teach them come in 3s. Your material will flesh out that much faster. And people, oh my gosh, I didn't know until that's why you took a class. I didn't know that either until I was 20 years into it. So the other comedians used to come out and watch my graduation shows because they wanted to see crashing and burning, because there's nothing a comedian loves more than to watch another comedian take it in the shorts, because we all know how hard it is. But then when they were doing well, they stopped showing up because it wasn't fun for them anymore. They wanted to see crashing and burning. It's like, no, I'm revealing the secrets to them. Well, what are you telling them for? We didn't have that coming up. And so that's exactly why I want to tell them that.
So the comedy rule of three has been around for a long, long time.
For a long time, yes.
What is the comedy rule of three? Why three?
You know, it's a beat thing. It's an innate thing. Rather than question it, I just say, I don't know why it is, but it is. And as you do it, and if someone will come up with it with a funny idea, a funny joke. Okay, a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. Now let's add to that and make it a three. I wish I could think of an example off the top of my head. I can't, but it's like a joke about whatever. It's like, let's add to it. Now, and even the three, now sometimes the first joke you think of, you can top it, two toppers. That's called a tagline. You want three of those. Or the joke you thought of, that's the best one. Let's write two to get up to that point. And then the third will have more of an impact. And it is a rhythm there. And everybody's got their own speech rhythm anyway. But if you start thinking in threes early, it will flesh out. It's a secret weapon, but you say it's not a secret. Everybody knows that, the rule of three. I basically implement it. Vince Lombardi talked about the Green Bay Packers at his Packers sweep. And he said he would talk 2 hours about one play that wasn't that glamorous or sexy, but it just, all the right components had to be there for it to work. And then fourth down, when it's 20 below zero in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and you're against the Bears or the Steelers, and everybody in that stadium, including the other team, knows that sweep is coming, but it's been so honed and perfected to an art form, bam. And that's the same thing with your jokes. You have 5 minutes, and it's like, okay, you can forget it. But if you've worked on it and you've got threes and it's in the right order, you're going to be so far ahead of people that have been in the business for years that just get up there like I did and just crash and burn with no direction.
Well, it's interesting to me because one of the strongest geometric shapes is the triangle.
Yeah.
So that's
the sides hold each other up, don't they?
The three sides hold each other up.
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
a point, and there's a pinnacle, and then there's a base, and so it has a parallel to what you're talking about, which is very, very interesting. So I have been speaking with this has been a fantastic hour and almost an hour and 5 minutes so far.
Thank you, buddy.
Dobie
I appreciate
Maxwell.
you having me.
You know, Dobie, I can tell from talking to you that you don't have any energy or passion at all. It's like you're
sorry, buddy.
It's like you're a live firecracker. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
In all of, you've already told us some amazing stories, but I'm going to pick your brain for some more. I know that you have three special stories that you like to tell. So the first one is, what was getting heckled by Donald Trump?
I was working in Florida in West Palm Beach at the time, opening for Rosie O'Donnell. It was about mid-90s, and they were friends at the time. I don't think they are now. And I was down at, it was called a house MC. So I could be down there as much as I wanted to. I knew the club owners down there. They had two clubs. One was in West Palm Beach and the other one was in Fort Lauderdale. And my birthday happens to be in March. So I went down there for February and March to watch spring training baseball. And I met Billy Gardell there, Pittsburgh guy, wonderful, funny guy. George Wallace, a lot of big comedians I worked with. And it was a 2-act show. I was pretty experienced. So they said, we don't have to pay a feature act. It's good for us. It's good for you. So working with Rosie O'Donnell, and I thought, oh my God, she's going to be a complete bitch. She could not have been any nicer. We got along absolutely wonderful. She was a pleasure to work with. So they came in on Friday night, and the manager said, Donald Trump is coming in tomorrow night. And we don't want to make a big thing about it. He was with Marla Maples at the time. And when you're on stage, we're going to open the back doors. You won't be able to see it, but there'll be a little commotion. And just so you know what's going to happen. So, yeah, well, I can handle anything. Don't worry about it. So the door opens up. I'm on stage, 500 people. It's a big comedy club. And I see 4 people walk in. Turns out it was Trump, Marla Maples, and 2 bodyguards. So they sit down. I'm doing my show. I hear out of the blue, when are you going to get funny? Donald Trump. I know it's him. And I'm thinking, okay, I said, look, I know who you are. Nobody else does in here. Why don't you just sit there, look stupid, let the real people do like you do at work all day long. This is not your office. This is my office. I'll handle this. Thank you. I do it, getting laughs. About 5 minutes later, I'm still waiting. It's him. All right. So now the guy that was the sound and lights guy turns on the sound and lights in the comedy club during the show in the showroom. That never happens before. So people are looking over. Oh my God, it's Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump. And it's just this buzz goes all the way through the comedy club. So he takes his bar napkin and he holds it up and waves it like a white flag. It's like, oh no. You're not going to get out that easy. Heckling me is, I'm the opening act. It's like tipping over a wheelchair saying I kicked your ass. Are you happy with it? When am I going to get funny? When are you going to finish that haircut that you got with an egg beater? Boom, I'm hitting them left and right with everything. And the crowd is going absolutely crazy. And I'm thinking, okay, can I please bring Rosie O'Donnell up here now? So it's like Hulk Hogan, every crowd goes crazy. At the end of the night, one of the bodyguards comes back and said, Mr. Trump thought you were very funny. I said, well, he could have walked his ass over here and told me that himself. Well, thank you very much. So it turns out they didn't pay their bill. Trump thought the bodyguard was going to pay it. The bodyguard thought Trump was going to pay it. So it made the local paper in West Palm Beach. Donald Trump goes to comedy club, doesn't pay his bill. So he sends the guy over with $100 bill. So I happened to be talking to a friend of mine in Milwaukee at the time. He was working at the newspaper. What happened? I got heckled by Donald Trump last night. So it made the Milwaukee paper, local comedian heckled by Donald Trump. I got the article. It's in there. So when he got elected, I'm thinking, oh my God, do I have a great story? So whatever you think about him politically, I don't care. It's just to get heckled by him. And he was pretty obnoxious, but that was a fun story.
Well, you got heckled by a future president of the United
Future
States.
president. Yeah, exactly.
So what is the count of mailing Crisco?
Yes. Oh, Steve, I'll try to talk to everybody's got a legend story. Whether Ozzy Osbourne bit the head off the bat or not doesn't matter. The people think that he did.
Sure.
Perception is out there. Richard Gere and the gerbil. Did it happen? Nobody knows. I don't know. That car accident I told you about. I had the car accident. I'm in the hospital in intensive care. And one of the comedy clubs in my hometown of Milwaukee was owned by a biker who rode with the same outlaws group as my father did. And he was 20 years younger than my father. And he was just a total ass. He was a bully, a bad guy. And I'm in intensive care, not knowing if I'm going to live or die. So the booker of the comedy club was a nicer lady who came out and said, oh, they're going to have a benefit for you at the comedy club. Why would you want to have a benefit for me? That guy doesn't like me. Well, they care about you. They don't care about me. Don't have a benefit. He wants me to die up here. No, I don't think that's true. So it turns out what they did was they charged $10 a head. They packed the place I was in the paper. I was a radio guy there. So it made a paper. So he kept that money, Steve. He kept it all. And he passed the hat at the end of the night. So the next day I'm in the hospital room, intensive care, saying, why did you send me? I got an envelope. It was $28 and change in there. I said, why did you put $28 change? Oh, I couldn't give you the door money. That was to pay for my expenses. I got a staff, but we passed the hat at the end of the night. And all the comedians, the show went long because they cared about you. No, they didn't care about me. Comedians are stage whores. It could be a Hitler Youth rally there. They would have gone up, and if it was a crowd there, they'd have done it. Well, you're pretty ungrateful for someone that's had a benefit in your name. I said, well, you know what? If I die up here, I will haunt your family for the rest of eternity. If I live, I will get my revenge on you, you fat bastard, one way or another. So I did live through it. About maybe 6 months later, I took a long time to learn how to walk again. This is after the bank robbery. I was in Nashville, Tennessee. This is before the internet. And I got a phone call. Did you hear about so-and-so, the owner of the comedy club? No. He had a heart attack. Is he dead? No, but coincidentally, he is in intensive care in the same hospital that you were in when you had your car accident. I thought, Steve, I should have been thankful. I said, the Lord, if there is a God up there, let me live. I have that second chance at life. And that lasted for about 10 minutes. I went right to the Kroger and I bought a tub of Crisco, a pound of bacon, some Cheese Whiz, some Miracle Whip, and a big card. And I said, you spent my benefit money to feed your biker friends. I will see you in hell. Here's a little dessert package for you. So I mailed it to the booking lady because I didn't know exactly where the hospital was. So she got on the phone and told everybody from coast to coast, all the top agents, did you hear what Dobie Maxwell did? Oh my God. So I got the nickname, the Count of Mailing Crisco. That came, I thought that was pretty funny. I don't remember who gave it to me, but it was funny. And that story has grown over the years, like Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off the bat. I met comedians that I haven't met. Are you the guy that mailed the booking aid? Yes, I'm the. So the story has grown that I was up in the hospital room and I was pinching his IV and the cops were there. And the story grows and the legend. I said, no, that didn't happen. I did mail it to the booking agent. So the story version I told you right now is what happened. But that's a legendary story. And in comedy, I'm the legendary guy that mailed the bad booking guy.
So this story has become like the Aristocrats. People just interpret it their own way.
They interpret it their own way. And you're the guy. You're the guy. And it's like they don't want to ask. I work with some comic for maybe a night or a couple of nights. And at the end of it says, oh, would you mind sharing the? Oh, you're gonna ask me the Crisco story. Yeah, man, I got to hear it from you. I just heard so many versions of it. So thank you. Hopefully people that listen to your show will get it. That's from the horse's mouth.
That's
How it
really
really
cool.
happened.
So, all right, last of the stories, and that is, what is Tuscaloosa, Alabama?
Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Yes, I was one of the first road trips I ever did as a show closer. And that's a hard thing to do. That's a really big step because you got to do 45 minutes. And the South is really hard for a Northern comedian. And I had never been down there before. So it was a little a sports bar in a hotel in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And I get there, and this was probably mid to late 80s. And I wasn't ready to do that. Nobody is when you move to the next level. I wasn't ready. So I walk up to the guy, that's the bartender, and he had piercings and tattoos and a ponytail, which wasn't hip then. And he really stood out. His look was unusual. And I said, I'm your comedian here. And go, you're going to have a hard time tonight, son. Why is that, sir? He goes, well, the radio station people, they all got fired. Excuse me? The radio station, they got fired. You mean fired? Yeah, that's what I said. Fired. So there was this big giant boom box out there. So the sponsoring radio station, like I've been through so many times, there was a format change, and they were all there. They had just gotten fired. They're drinking since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had just driven all day to get to Tuscaloosa. I could just feel the vibe in there, man. It wasn't going well. So I'm okay. Well, I want to be a comedian. This is what I got to do. So I show up 4 hours later. It's showtime. The people from the radio station are at the table. They're just absolutely blitzed. In the back by the pool tables, there's guys from the Alabama football team. Okay, they play on the team. Big jar heads with crew cuts. They're drinking pitchers of beer, not glasses of beer. Pitchers. They're just downing the pitchers. They're drunk. The show goes on. So the first guy, the comic comes up. He happened to be an African-American gentleman. Well, you know what word that they came up with that they were calling him out loud. So he left the stage, as well he should. I could not believe that even happened. So he had about 5 minutes on stage. The next guy that came up was inexperienced. He was supposed to do 30 to 35 minutes. It's called the feature position. Well, he came up. He lasted about 7 minutes, and he got off the stage. So that guy with the piercings and the tattoos, the bartender gets up. He goes, F those pussy MFers. This guy from Chicago is going to come up here and do 2.5 hours of comedy for you. And I'm looking back, who the hell walked in? Did Tom Dreesen walk in here? Jerry, what's going on here? And he brings me up a doobie. Oh, get your little Yankee ass on up here. So I'm thinking, oh God, I'm so screwed right now. So I did about 10 minutes, and it went kind of okay. And they're drinking the radio station, and the guys in the back are playing pool. And it's just, or I can just feel I'm losing them after 10 minutes. What am I going to do? I'm supposed to do at least 45. And I finally said, roll tide. That's the Crimson Tide of Alabama. That's their big thing. Roll tide. And, ooh, yeah, I got them back. All right. Yeah, roll tide. I did about 5 more minutes, and I'm losing them again. So finally, I'm thinking, there's no way. I'm pushing a freight train up a hill. So one of the football players in the back said, get off the stage, you Yankee. So I said, okay, I just snapped. I drove all day. They're racist. They're drunks. They're nasty. So I turned up the sound that was on the stage. But what I didn't know is I'm turning on the sound that's going on the emergency thing all the way through the hotel. Okay, it's the emergency sound. And I said, I want to tell you, Southerners, from the bottom of my heart, F. Bear Bryant and his dead cancerous ass. Well, he's the coach. And that's like, talking about Vince Lombardi in Green Bay, or, Jesus in Jerusalem. You don't say that. And it's just silence. No one knows what to say. And I said, for those of you that didn't hear me, I said it again. I walked around and worked in the room, and I said, oh, you lost the Civil War. What are you, banging your sister? Every Southern stereotype I could figure. I'm going to go right back up to the North, where Black people can ride anywhere they want to on the bus, and we won the war, and you can all, so I just dropped the mic drop, and nobody knows what to do. They didn't clap, they didn't boo, they didn't talk. So now I got these 3 big security guards. They're giving me the Elvis daisy chain. They're holding their arms around. I'm walking through the crowd, and I'm thinking, I'm going to die tonight. This is my last night on earth. It's all over. I get to my room. My heart is pounding. The phone rings. Oh my God, who's that? It's the guy behind the bar. He goes, you in a lot of trouble, boy. You stay right there. I'll be right over to your room. So he gives me the secret knock. My heart's beating faster. He comes in. The 3 big goons are behind him. Sits down on my bed. He pulls out money. He starts paying me. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm getting paid. I didn't think that was going to happen. So he finishes paying me. And I'll never forget this, Steve, as long as I live. He looks me in the eye and goes, you in a lot of trouble, boy. He goes, they're going to kill you. Just matter of fact, they're going to kill you. He goes, you got to get your shit and get. So So they packed my stuff. I packed my stuff. I walked through the kitchen, the back of the hotel. I got in my car and I went to the next town, which was Biloxi, Mississippi. I slept in a rest area. I didn't have money for a hotel that night. So the next night I get to Biloxi, Mississippi. I said, yeah, my name is Maxwell. I'm the town today. Hello, Mr. Maxwell. How are you? Are there any messages for me? No, sir, Mr. Maxwell. Glad to have you. So he didn't say anything. And I said he could have called the booking agent. He didn't call the booking agent. So I dodged a major bullet. I should have died that night. There's no way. So, and I for weeks after that, I started getting calls. Did you work Tuscaloosa? Yeah, they got your picture right above the stage. And when you went in, they told me what you did. I'm surprised. I'm surprised I'm not dead either. So between the Crisco story and the Tuscaloosa, I am a comedy legend inside the business. Those two stories right there, I can sit at a bar and tell them left and right. So I know we went a little bit long tonight. You can cut it out.
Do you? Yeah, I love it. Do you ever go play there now?
No, I've never been there again. Never been there ever again.
You think they remember?
There is a book. There's a book called I Killed. It's by two comedians, Rich Scheidner and Mark Schiff, who are very funny comedians and great guys. They took road stories from comedians, and that story made their particular book. And there are people that collect stories. So the comedians, so I go to clubs sometimes, and they'll have me autograph my story in their book. They say, we read that whole book. That story, that's our favorite right there.
No, that's amazing. It is amazing you survived that night.
I should have been dead, buddy. There's no doubt about it. I really died. I'm a cat. I have 9 lives.
Well, that's a good bit of luck.
That's a good bit of luck. Yes, that was a good one right there. And again, it's a heck of a story. I didn't put that one in my bunk in the middle book.
Last question for the night, Dobie. All right.
Yes.
So you obviously have been around the block a few times. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who may be trying to break into the business, maybe like your students, or maybe somebody who's in and they're trying to get to the next level? Now, you've already given us a ton of advice. Do you have anything special that you can share?
Yes, I think you really have to follow if the dream and the desire is in you, it's in there for a reason. Don't let that die. Don't say, well, my so-and-so, my friends, my family, they don't like me to do that. Do it. I'd rather be miserable chasing the dream that I did. I chased my dream, failed at pretty much everything, got a lot of great stories out of it, but I'm so happy now that I didn't just give up. And a lot of times you look at the people, the Foxworthys of the world that had a vision. Follow your vision, follow your dream, and surround yourself with positive people that will encourage you. So many people will bring you down. I don't know what the ratio is, but it's very few that will actually encourage you. That's the one thing in my classes. I will encourage you and be your confidant and mentor. That's so important. Don't give up.
Dobie Maxwell, this has been an absolutely splendid hour and 22 minutes. Believe that.
Oh, buddy. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm going to listen to all your episodes too.
This has been so much fun to have you on the show because you just go. You just set you on fire and you just keep going.
That's it. Well, I like to say when I come on, we start out as a podcast, we end as friends. So hopefully we'll be in touch. And next time in Pittsburgh, I'll buy a Permani Brothers. We'll have fun.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. Story Beat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden. And may all your stories be unforgettable.